Our commander to the Eternal Might Precon is Temmet, Naktamun's Will. Temmet reads Vigilance, Menace. Whenever you attack, draw a card, then discard a card. Whenever you draw a card, zombies you control get +1/+1 until the end of turn. With this commander deck, we want to make sure we put as many zombies on the battlefield as possible. Because for each zombie that we have, that's another creature that's going to be buffed by our commander's ability. Whenever we draw cards, we have to draw at the beginning of our turn, and then we're going to draw as we attack. So Temmet automatically essentially gives all of our zombies +2/+2 every turn that is our own turn, we should say. So if we have 4 zombies on the battlefield, that's 16 damage that we will be able to deal to our opponents, not including Temmet's damage as well. Temmet does have Vigilance and Menace, which is gonna let us attack and still have the ability to block our life total and defend our life total with Temmet. So playing cards like Maskwood Nexus, we can tap to create 2/2 shapeshifter tokens that, just so new players are aware, are also technically considered zombies. We also can play cards like Grave Titan that just have zombies enter the battlefield as he enters the battlefield and attacks. Dread Summons we can use to go ahead and just put a ton of zombies on the battlefield at one time when we have the mana for it. And then God Eternal Oketra, we can create 4/4 zombie creature tokens, which would technically become 6/6s as you're drawing cards with Temmet to deal damage to our opponents as we cast our zombies. And then the Scarab God just exiles creatures from the graveyard, and then we're able to create 4/4 zombie tokens of our opponent's creatures. Also keeping in mind that if you have Renewed Solidarity in play, at the beginning of your end step, for each token you control of the chosen type that entered this turn, create a token that's a copy of it. So for every zombie token that you're able to create, you essentially create another zombie token at the end of your turn. This card is incredibly powerful, and I could see this card being worth at least $20 or $30 at some point in the future. So because Temmet wants more zombies on the battlefield, we need to make sure that as we're playing this deck, we're being intelligent with how we are placing our attacks and how we are using our mana. So for example, we have 3 cards over here, a Zombie Master, an Accursed Dunyard, and an Unholy Grotto. Each of these cards over here allow us to regenerate a zombie. Noticing that the Zombie Master, the regenerate cost is a black mana, and the Accursed Dunyard costs 2 mana. So when we're playing the game, we need to make sure that we're leaving open mana open off to the side, looking like this, at least 1 or 2 mana open. If for whatever reason Temmet gets targeted with removal, we could always use the 2 mana to tap the Dunyard to regenerate Temmet, which will essentially keep him alive. Also keep in mind that we have the Unholy Grotto over here as well, which says that we can pay a black to put target zombie from our graveyard on the top of our library. Now Temmet is going to be allowing us to draw cards, technically 2 cards every single turn. So as we're making our attacks, let's attack with creatures that we don't really mind if we lose. A card like a Fleshbag Marauder, if we attack with this and Temmet is in play, this could be a 5/3 attacking one of our opponents. If our opponents choose to block this Fleshbag Marauder, it may die. It will go into the graveyard, to which we can then tap the Unholy Grotto during our second main phase, which would then put the Marauder back on the top of our library, so that as we go to draw for turn, we could then take that Fleshbag, cast the Fleshbag again, noticing that when Fleshbag enters the battlefield, each opponent is going to have to sacrifice a creature, or each player is going to have to sacrifice a creature of their choice. That's important because there are a lot of cards inside this deck, or some cards inside this deck, like an Undead Augur, that would allow us to draw cards as our creatures die. So our Fleshbag Marauder would die once. That would be 1 extra card that we would draw. We could then cast Fleshbag Marauder again to then kill another creature we control, or this Fleshbag, which would trigger the Undead Augur again, which would draw us another card. Long story short, when we're looking at the cards that we have, we need to see how they interact with one another, and we need to make sure that as we're doing things, we're maximizing the number of creatures that we have on the battlefield. Noticing that even though I'm losing this Fleshbag Marauder, I'm technically not losing it because I'm using cards to put that card back into play and maintaining a large number of creatures on my side of the board so that we can buff them with Temmet. So inside this precon, we're either going to be drawing cards as creatures die, like with the cards you see over here. We can also draw a ton of cards potentially on our turn with the cards you see right here. But what I want you to focus on, new players, is that we have a ton of cards inside this deck that let us draw cards on our opponent's turn. I know we talked earlier about using Temmet and drawing cards and dealing a ton of damage to our opponents, but defense is just as important as offense sometimes. A lot of these cards we can cast on our opponent's turn, like I said. Specifically, the cycling ability appears a lot inside this precon, which we can use to pay 2 mana to discard this card and then draw a card, which means that if I have a zombie to protect my life total, I could look at its power, and it is a 2/2. Let's imagine that Temmet is in play as well. I can then cycle this land over here. Let's say I have this card that I can cycle. I could cycle this as well. I can cycle as many cards as I'm able to, which for every card that I cycle is another card that I'm going to draw. And because I'm drawing those cards, that means that this zombie is going to get buffed, or I should say every zombie is going to get buffed by 1 for each card that I draw. So this would be a pretty powerful play if your opponent's looking to attack you and they think that their attacks are safe. You can draw a ton of cards on their turn and then just block all of their creatures, destroy potentially all of their creatures, so that as it goes back to your turn, you can then attack with those same zombies. And if we play our cards right, we could cast a card like a Prophet of the Scarab when our opponents have no blocks, and then we're able to draw cards for each zombie that we have into play, which could potentially buff our zombies by 5, 6, or 7 damage. And then out of nowhere, we just deal 70 damage to an opponent and knock them out of the game. Having the opportunity to deal 70 damage to one of your opponents is something that can definitely happen when playing this commander deck. But there is something that I need all of you to keep in mind when you are playing this deck. This is the most important part of this video. If you do not remember this, there will be a day where you will lose a game because you forgot what I'm about to talk about right now. Because we're playing this deck is essentially an alpha strike deck. I attack as it's safe to, so that I can draw cards, so that at one point I can do something to buff all my creatures and deal 80 to my opponent, right? The thing is though, I need you to be aware that in Magic the Gathering, there are cards that are called fogs. Fogs eliminate all combat damage from allowing to occur. There are fogs in almost every single color, which means that when you are going to do this alpha strike attack to knock someone out of the game, you need to make sure that you're either leaving some blockers. Luckily enough, Temmet has vigilance, so he can protect your life total. But as you go to attack, you need to ask yourself, if there is a fog, can my opponent attack me back next turn? Whether it means that with the creatures they have on the battlefield, does their commander have haste? Is there something that can attack with infect? You know, is there anything that could potentially exist where if I got fogged right now, that I would just get attacked the next turn and automatically lose the game? And I'm telling you from experience, that has happened to me. I have done that to people. I have seen that happen to others. So this is something that occurs in the game of Magic the Gathering. Maybe I can leave 3 blockers back, and then instead of doing 80 damage, I do 60 damage. But now that means I have 3 extra blockers just in case somebody does something, which doesn't allow me to attack, so that I can still protect my life total going on beyond that point. Now, the last thing I always recommend is that you play test your commander decks, which means you're going to shuffle up your deck, you're going to sit down, and you're going to pretend that you're playing against somebody. Because as you do that, you'll notice that you'll see different things that can happen. You can imagine that you're playing against people. so that when you sit down and play for real, you have a general idea of how cards can synergize. I talked a lot today about how different cards work together and how we can create moments that really hurt our opponents because we can see how cards can synergize together. But if you're a new player and you don't have the experience of doing that and you don't know how cards can work together, then you're really putting yourself at a disadvantage before you go play against your friends if winning is your goal. Now, if you plan on purchasing this commander deck, I'm going to be creating a $100 upgrade guide for this deck so you can learn what cards to take out of the deck, what cards to add to the deck, so that you can create something that's just genuinely unfair for your opponents to play against. If you like videos like this, you guys can like the video. Keep in mind that I create videos like this for every pre-con that releases. The next guide we're going to be creating is for the Saheeli pre-con. When you're buying upgrades for your pre-cons, be sure to use the card trader link in the description below to help support the channel. Always remember, eat healthy, work out every single day, and most importantly, you guys got to remember to believe in yourself. All right, peace out.